Well, I don't know much about, so what happened was I prepared for last week's class and no one came.
We'll do last week's class today.
So I'm gonna,
Today.
yeah, and that's what we're gonna do.
What was last week?
I think you went to the bathroom, Ginger. By the time you came back, I decided no one was coming and I went to, sat in Ellen's office. There's the notes on last week's hymns. I did not prepare notes for this week's hymns,
I thought,
but,
well, all things bright and beautiful, just.
yeah, that's such a lovely, I'd like to start with that one actually. And if you want to read up about last week's hymns, again, Jesus Lives. I'd never sung that before either though. That first hymn from last week.
Yeah.
That was hard.
And it's hard if you don't know it.
That's right.
It's just hard. So I included a ton of biographical or autographical information about
Well, that's good.
about
Thank you.
it, and then where the scripture comes from. Now, the second song we sang, Lamb's High Feast, I do know, and it's a lovely song and is frequently a favorite of choral and music for it. So if you haven't sung Lamb's High Feast, you might have heard it sung as an offertory or an anthem. So it is a lovely piece for choirs and has so many opportunities. And it's very popular because it's set to a 16th century German folk tune. You know, that's when they recorded it, but maybe it's even older than that. So it's a tune that a lot of folks knew in terms of, you know, like Mary Had a Little Lamb. It's not, but you know, when you hear a familiar tune, it's like being in
broken.
or like being in the elevator
Yeah.
and you hear a song, you're like, oh, that song, you know, like maybe a popular song from our youth or something. So I think it had that kind of quality that made it easy to sing. It has this great alliteration in there. You guys are gonna need some hymnals.
Here, I can do it.
Where
Are they here?
Yep.
I'm looking for William.
are you?
You got
Only
only
three.
three.
No, they're all over.
Back there.
I was gonna tell you, we'll pick them up when you came in, but.
So are we looking at Lamb's High Feast? Is that?
Yeah.
No, 174.
Or 174.
Put page number, thank you.
Yeah. What I love about this hymn is its use of poetry. And that's not always the case with every hymn we sing, you know that.
True.
But if you look
I
at,
don't know this at all.
no?
You don't have the music to.
Lamb's High Feast we sing, praise to our victorious King.
Oh, okay, yeah, that sounds.
Yes, we do know it.
Chosen, the tide flowing from his pierced side. Praise we him whose love divine gives and sacred is his body for the feast. Christ the victim, Christ the priest. So I messed up on that.
I would have thought I knew that, but I didn't.
But you do. It's a
Yeah.
familiar hymn tune. It's called Salzburg, right? That's what I'm saying. It's used in other
song.
Right, again, it's a very familiar tune once you start it. And I wanted to look at the words a bit. It's a very much a sacramental hymn. You'll see that in there. It's got conversation about Eucharist and how that ties this together. And then those great words like Christ the victim, Christ the priest. And you're gonna see that repeated in verse 2. Where it says Paschal victim, Paschal bread, on the third line of the second verse. And then again, Easter triumph, Easter joy in the fourth verse. So it has these sort of repeating things that I find that easy for me to remember, and I look forward to singing the lines. Hymns of glory, songs of praise. So it's got some of that repetitive nature to it that helps you tie in to this. It does recount. Can you see the Old Testament tie-in?
Paschal's blood is poured.
Right. And yes, that is in all of verse 2. Because it's Israel's hosts triumph and go through the wave that drowns the foe. Okay, this is making that connection.
Red Sea stuff?
Red Sea stuff, but it makes the connection between what Jesus did on the cross and what happened with Moses leading folks, right? Death. There's a connection there, right, between how we understand that thing about death. Hi, Fred. And then verse 3, victory over death.
Let's get over.
I'm wondering, verse 3, I asked the question, which phrase captivates y'all? Mighty victim from on high, hell's fierce powers beneath thee lie. Thou hast conquered in the fight, thou hast brought us life and light. No, now no more can death appall. Now no more the grave enthrall. Thou hast opened paradise, and in thee thy saints shall rise.
I love that last one, the open paradise and saints arrive.
Yeah, I think I most like that phrase where it's like, no longer death, no, it's where, that, no more can death appall. No, now no more the grave enthrall. So that means leaving behind those, that sort of, death living ways that we do live, right? We are kind of a death focused in some ways. Now that we talk about death, I understand that no one talks about death, but the way sometimes we don't fully live into the resurrection. So if we're not fully living into new life, we are kind of still treading on the grave, aren't we? So that's what I mean. So, and that use of appall and enthrall, really nicely done in this hymn. And then Easter triumph and Easter joy, and then the destiny of who Jesus was is realized, or the destiny of our salvation, it's realized. So the words were translated from the Latin. So they're very old. They might be 4 centuries old.
They still rhyme.
Good words.
Well, the guy who translated them made them rhyme.
Yeah, yeah.
They may have actually been translated into German first, probably, and then into English. So you can see the connection that we share in our root language, right? But I'm sure I'm trying to make. When you listen to this online, there are a couple of different versions. Some words are slightly changed, not completely. Any questions about at the Lamb's High Feast we sing?
No, I wasn't thinking that I'd ever sung it when we first said the name of it, but I think it's great and the words are really
Aren't
good.
they beautiful?
Yeah, they are.
Now, that
Old-fashioned,
song,
Yeah, old fashioned, right? I doubt if any younger people, it's a little test. It's a little hard. Phrasing is hard. When you remember the first time you ever read like a real poem, I don't mean like Ogden Nash. Okay, that's how we get into things. But when we read our first poem, I'm trying to remember what the first poem I ever read, probably like Robert Frost. His are a little bit more straightforward. I could kind of imagine.
It was a little strange.
I was like, I don't even know what it means. Right? Maybe took the classes talking about what it means. I'm like, I don't know. It's like, it's words. I don't know what it means. I remember like, on the White Cliffs of Dover. I'm like, isn't that about the White Cliffs of Dover? No, it's about death. You're like, what? I don't know. I mean, so oftentimes I think our hymnody is like that. I like praise music. It just all sounds the same to me. And I think that my kids have said that, well, Mom, that's the way hymns sound to us. The hymns all sound exactly the same. I said, you mean because they're played on an organ? Yeah. I said, well, that's why I feel about praise music, because it's played on a guitar. So, I think that there's a little bit, not always, and I'm trying not to be judgy or whatever. The theology in some of these hymns is quite deep and is so linked to scripture, right? That's where I find that it can be refreshing, renewing, prayerful. You could pray this, right? This could be a prayer for you.
Absolutely.
I mean, and I think that's what music is anyway. It's always, I think
It
doesn't matter what kind of, right? The next hymn there is such a beautiful tune. Now the green blade riseth, and it's on 204. You might not remember it last week because it was the communion song.
So it was the instrumental, I mean, there was no.
No, and I don't think, and I'm not even sure Mr. Tracy Bailey, Mr. Bailey, played it at 9. He sang it, the choir sang it at 11. But again, it's got a great little, it's also, now the green blade riseth from the buried grain. We that in dark earth many days has laid. Love lives again, that with the dead has been. Love is come again, like wheat that springeth green. So it's a French carol. There's a Christmas carol that uses that same hymn tune that may be more familiar to you. It's just that it's such a great, I love that tune. It's the words themselves are kind of written much later, right? So it's one of those things like there's no author because it was a folk tune, possibly something like that. In verse 1, love has come again like wheat that springeth green. That metaphor, we've talked about that. What does resurrection mean? Sure. And this is a very common metaphor, right? The seed that appears dead. When you look at it, when you feel it, there's no way you can see that an ear of corn, you might in a corn seed. Let's think of something else. In a wheat grain, when you look at a grain of wheat, there's no idea that what it will become, right? Right? We don't know. And, so it's something that appears dead, but is not. And the only thing that you know, ministry with this is the mystery of God. And everything that needs life is in that seed. Everything is there, you know, and kids are always fascinated by that. And I guess I still am too, a bit. In verse 2, you have this whole juxtaposition of love and hate, and they that thought him dead. How often is this the case for us? What I was asking was, in the grave they laid him, love whom hate had slain, thinking that never he would wake again, laid in the earth like grain that sleeps unseen. I do think it's that. It is very much. Sometimes we don't think of it like that. I know the opposite of love could be a lot of things, but certainly where hate dwells, it's hard for love to be seen and known. And they thought they buried that love away, but they had not. And how often in our own lives do we try to bury something that's good? Even if that's a quality in us or some other group of people that we don't understand, you know, like we do this. This is not just this. What happened in between? I'm sorry. So, you know, that's kind of a hateful act that looks like it had triumph, but when you hear the people from Buffalo, they're still grieving, they're recognizing but they're standing together because someone's saying, well, what's next or something, you know, the reporter, because I guess reporters have a standard questions, what's next? And they're like, we don't know what's next. We're living this day by day, minute by minute, inviting love to come into this space. So that it didn't just happen 2,000 years ago. That act did happen, but it should be for us the reminder, if nothing else, that love does triumph from that. And verse 3, then it goes back to the 3 days triumph. So now you get closer to the resurrection story and that. And then verse 4 is, then what is your personal part in this? Right? So I love this hymn. When our hearts are wintry, grieving or in pain, thy touch can call us back to life again. Fields of our hearts, that dead and bare have run. Love has come again.
Yeah.
So I just love the flow in the hymn, that it has an opportunity for us, even if we missed it in verse 3, in verse 4, we can say, oh, this is about me. You get a second chance. But it happens so fast that sometimes we miss it. And you can see there that I've given you the text, John 12 and 1 Corinthians, right? The hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. Very truly, I tell you, unless a grain of wheat falls into the grain, but if it dies, it bears much fruit. Yeah, seeds on your shelf will never become cucumbers.
No.
Now, in my case, even if you plant them, they will never become cucumbers. All my cucumbers have died already.
Oh.
They haven't. First Corinthians says, as for what you sow, you do not sow the body that is to be, but a bare seed, perhaps of wheat or some other grain, but God gives it a body as he has chosen, and to each kind of seed its own body. Now, we could spend maybe 6 weeks no one will know, just let it go. Cannot start video. I don't know what's happening. Okay, so this one is kind of interesting in that it's from the 8th century. Isn't that something? John of Damascus was a monk, lived in the woods or the desert or something. Damascus, they were from the woods. And he wrote 50 other texts, poems, reflections, different things that have been turned into music. Translated by John Mason Neale, who is quite well known and has translated tons of other stuff. And you'll see his name often at the bottom of pages. The tomb name, Ellicombe or Ellicombe, it's a village in Devonshire. And it's been around for almost 150 years.
Ireland or
107.
Scotland, where's
England.
England.
And if you turn it over on the back, because of its form, I copied this, you guys can follow in the AABA, which is much like poetry, right? Because of the way the tune goes, it's rather cheerful and easily sung in harmony, right? And then I've given you the text that it kind of reflects there for 210. And you guys know this, the day of resurrection, tell it out abroad. The Passover of gladness, the Passover of God. From death to life eternal, from earth unto the sky. Our Christ has brought us over with hymns of victory. So you see the flow? So that's why I think it's easy for us to sing. We're going to repeat that line. AA, we're going to repeat that line. Then we have a different line. Then we're going to repeat the same line we just sang a minute ago. So it helps us remember what we're singing. So the theology is pretty clear. They want you to announce this day of resurrection. Sure. It still has some Passover language. You see that? The Passover of gladness, the Passover of God. And then this is my favorite verse, verse 2, the universal intent for this day of resurrection. Be pure, right? Let me be alive. Are we living into the universal intent of Easter? And you guys know that have been with me on Thursday.
What is this part?
The internet's unstable,
Oh,
so it kicks you off.
but nobody's on, so.
No, okay. But they are recording.
Right.
They are recording me eating this biscuit.
Well, that's all right.
I don't have to do one.
Comes from wheat.
So you'll see there are some scriptural references that have come for each of those widely from Revelation to Matthew to the Psalms to John.
Wow, yeah.
A lot of praise tunes are about the salvation, the salvific work of Jesus, right? And they can certainly be tied to scripture, but often it's very limited. It doesn't kind of plumb the depths as many of our hymns tend to do, because they're taken from ancient sources where they were used as a teaching tool, much like, storytelling. Because what else was there? Of course, if you didn't know Latin back in the day, you were screwed all the way around. But you know what I mean? It was a way to sort of get the message out
I think it's a good way.
yeah, right? All right,
I've got to go get me some water.
okay,
I'll have to be right back.
okay. All right, so today is the 14th of May. And we sang Good Christians All Rejoice and Sing. We can look at that 205 and see what we can learn. The words are fairly recent.
Yeah.
The hymn tune, not so much. Might be
I
why
had trouble with this one.
That might be why the